Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell for more true crime story. In the suburbs of Chicago during the 1970s, John Wayne Gacy was the kind of man you'd want living next door. He hosted summer barbecues, lent tools to neighbors, and even entertained children at birthday parties dressed as Pogo the Clown. By all appearances, he was a respectable businessman, an active community member, and a doting father. But beneath the surface of this cheerful facade lurked one of the most twisted serial killers in American history. To understand the monster Gacy became, we must start with the man he pretended to be. A troubled childhood. Born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois, John Wayne Gacy grew up under the shadow of a harsh and alcoholic father. His dad, John Stanley Gacy, was a World War I veteran who ruled the household with an iron fist. He frequently berated and beat his son, calling him sissy and mama's boy. Gacy later claimed that these early experiences of humiliation and emotional neglect shaped his deep need for approval and his hidden rage. Despite this troubled home life, Gacy tried to fit in. He avoided sports due to a heart condition, but he became involved in student politics, managed school projects, and later volunteered extensively in his adult life. Efforts to build a normal identity that masked his growing darkness. Early signs of deception. In his 20s, Gacy married Marlon Myers and moved to Waterloo, Iowa, where he managed 3 KFC restaurants owned by his father-in-law. He quickly became a respected figure in town and even joined the local JCs, a leadership training organization. But behind the polished image was a man already living a double life. In 1968, Gacy was convicted of sexually assaulting a teenage boy. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison but served just 18 months. His wife divorced him while he was incarcerated, and he never saw his children again. Despite the conviction, Gacy emerged from prison seemingly rehabilitated, or so it appeared. He returned to Chicago, moved in with his mother, and eventually started his own construction business, PDM Contractors. Business thrived, and Gacy soon bought a modest home at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue in Norwood Park Township, a home that would later become a crime scene of unspeakable horror. The clown persona. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of Gacy's public life was his role as Pogo the Clown. He created the character himself, complete with bright makeup, a red nose, and oversized shoes. He performed at hospitals, fundraisers, and children's parties. To his neighbors, Gacy was a generous man who gave back to his community. But psychologists would later say that Pogo wasn't just a costume, it was a mask. One that allowed Gacy to explore his darkest fantasies without suspicion. The clown, long a symbol of childhood joy, became an icon of fear once his crimes were exposed. In fact, Gacy himself once remarked, "You know, clowns can get away with murder, hiding in plain sight." Through the mid-1970s, Gacy expanded his business and social circle. He rubbed elbows with local politicians, had photos taken with First Lady Rosalynn Carter, and even considered running for office. He often hired teenage boys to work for his company, most of whom were vulnerable, in need of money, or estranged from their families. These boys, some of them later found dead, trusted him, and Gacy thrived on that trust. He used it to control, manipulate, and eventually destroy. Despite repeated complaints, missing persons reports, and whispers of something strange about the man on Somerdale Avenue, Gacy remained untouched by the law. He was protected by his charisma, his reputation, and the belief that someone like him, a local leader, a cheerful clown, could never be a killer. But the truth was lurking beneath the floorboards, literally, foreshadowing the horror. By 1978, over 30 young men had vanished in and around the Chicago area, many of them last seen near Gacy's neighborhood. Still, there was no arrest, no raid. Gacy carried on working, socializing, and killing. That same year, a 15-year-old boy named Robert Pius disappeared after telling his mother he was going to meet a man about a job. That man was John Wayne Gacy. Pius' case would be the one that unraveled everything. On December 11, 1978, 15-year-old Robert Pius vanished from a pharmacy in Des Plaines, Illinois. He told his mother he would be back shortly after speaking to a contractor about a job. He never returned. The man he was scheduled to meet was John Wayne Gacy. This would be the beginning of the end for Gacy, and the beginning of a horrifying investigation that would shock the nation. A routine missing person case turns dark. Des Plaines police initially treated Pius' disappearance like any other missing person case. But something didn't sit right with Lieutenant Joseph Kozenczak. Robert wasn't the type of teen to run away. He had plans, goals. He was responsible. His mother was frantic and insistent that her son had mentioned a man named Gacy. A background check revealed something disturbing. Gacy had a prior conviction for sodomy involving a teenage boy in Iowa. With this information, Kozenczak got a search warrant for Gacy's home. What they found during the initial search wasn't conclusive, but it was suspicious. A set of handcuffs, male clothing that didn't fit Gacy, and a pungent odor wafting up from the crawl space beneath the house. There wasn't enough to arrest him, but Gacy was now under 24-hour surveillance. The man behind the mask begins to crack. For the next several days, Gacy knew he was being watched. At first, he tried to charm the officers, offering them breakfast, buying them meals, even inviting them inside. But as the pressure mounted, his composure began to unravel. He started drinking heavily. He missed appointments. He drove erratically. He confessed vague secrets to friends. Then, in a shocking turn, he handed one of the officers a bag of marijuana and said, "This is for you, so you can forget about me." The police didn't forget. They were building a case. The second search and the horrifying truth. On December 21st, a second warrant was granted. This time, investigators returned with purpose and uncovered what they feared most. Inside the crawl space beneath the house, police discovered decomposing human remains. One, then another, then another. The count kept rising. Gacy was arrested that night. Under interrogation, he confessed to everything and more. He claimed to have killed over 30 young men and boys. Many had been buried beneath his house. Others were dumped in the Des Plaines River when he ran out of room. What stunned even the most seasoned detectives wasn't just the body count. It was the calm, calculated way Gacy described the killings. The victims who were forgotten. Most of Gacy's victims were teenagers or young men, often runaways or boys estranged from their families. They were lured with the promise of construction work, money, or simply kindness from an older man who seemed trustworthy. Once inside his home, Gacy would offer them a drink, sometimes laced with drugs. He'd perform a trick as Pogo the Clown, usually involving handcuffs. Then the horror began. He strangled most of them. Some were sexually assaulted. He buried their bodies in his crawl space, layer upon layer. At one point, he poured quicklime to mask the smell, but even that couldn't contain the stench of death forever. In total, 29 bodies were found beneath his house. 4 more were recovered from the river. The youngest known victim was 14. Why no one stopped him sooner? The question echoed across the country. How did John Wayne Gacy get away with it for so long? The answer lies in the very nature of his double life. Gacy was a master manipulator. He hid behind his business, his clown persona, his connections with politicians and local leaders. When parents raised concerns or filed missing persons reports, they were often brushed off, especially if the missing boys were gay or seen as troubled. In the 1970s, homophobia and apathy toward runaway youth made it easy for Gacy to target victims who wouldn't be missed or whose families didn't have the resources to fight back. Gacy knew this. He counted on it. The nation reacts. News of the crimes swept across the country. Photos of Gacy in his clown makeup were broadcast everywhere, turning him into a symbol of evil hiding in plain sight. The idea that a man who entertained children could also bury dozens beneath his home was more than horrifying. It was incomprehensible. Parents grew fearful. Law enforcement faced scrutiny, and psychologists began trying to answer the question everyone was now asking. What kind of mind could do this? By the time John Wayne Gacy confessed to murdering 33 young men and boys, investigators and the public were left grappling with the same question. What kind of person could commit such unspeakable crimes while maintaining a perfectly normal life on the outside? To understand Gacy's horrific actions, we must look beyond the surface. to the mind that orchestrated them. A charming facade, a cold interior. Psychologists who studied Gacy after his arrest described him as a textbook psychopath. Intelligent, manipulative, egotistical, and utterly lacking in empathy. On the surface, he could be warm, generous, even funny. But beneath the surface was someone who viewed people, especially his victims, as disposable tools to satisfy his own desires. Gacy showed no signs of delusion. He knew what he was doing was wrong. He just didn't care. In fact, he felt justified in his actions. During interviews, he frequently blamed his victims, claiming they were willing, or suggesting they deserved their fate for being gay or vulnerable. This ability to detach from the humanity of others is a hallmark of sociopathy. Gacy didn't see boys and young men. He saw targets, objects, and as long as he could bury their bodies and move on, the guilt never followed him. The split personality, Jekyll and Hyde. One of the most disturbing aspects of Gacy's case was how well he maintained two personas: the upstanding community man and the brutal killer. This double life wasn't an accident, it was calculated. To his neighbors, Gacy was a business owner, party host, and civic volunteer. He donated to charities. He took photos with politicians. He dressed as a clown to cheer up sick children. But late at night, his home became a chamber of horror. The crawlspace beneath his house, where he buried so many victims, was symbolic of the two versions of himself: what was seen and what was hidden. Criminologists often refer to this type of behavior as compartmentalization. Gacy was a master of it. He could perform at a children's hospital in the morning, bury a body at night, and show up to work like nothing happened. This psychological split allowed him to exist in two worlds, until they collapsed into one: control, power, and rage. Much of Gacy's pathology centered on control. His crimes weren't just acts of violence, they were rituals of dominance. He often handcuffed his victims under the guise of performing a magic trick. Once restrained, he would assault and murder them, asserting complete control over their lives and their deaths. Forensic psychologists believe Gacy's rage was rooted in his childhood. His father had beaten and humiliated him. As an adult, Gacy transferred this rage onto others, reenacting the power dynamic, this time with himself in control. His victims were almost always young, vulnerable males. Many were runaways, some were gay or questioning, others were simply desperate for work. Gacy selected them because they could be easily manipulated, and because he believed no one would come looking. No remorse, only rationalization. Perhaps the most chilling part of Gacy's psychological profile was his complete lack of remorse. Even after his arrest, he insisted he was innocent, despite having confessed to the murders. He claimed that someone else buried the bodies in his crawlspace. He blamed drugs, the police, even the victims themselves. He once said, "A clown can get away with murder," and in many ways he believed he had. His ability to lie, even to himself, was so profound that he rewrote reality in his own mind. Gacy didn't see himself as a monster. He saw himself as misunderstood, even persecuted. During his trial, he painted himself as a victim of circumstance. His defense attorneys attempted an insanity plea, but psychologists were quick to point out, Gacy knew right from wrong. He just didn't care what the experts say. Experts have debated whether Gacy fit the profile of a serial killer driven by sexual compulsion, a predator fueled by power, or a sadist who simply enjoyed pain. The truth may be a combination. Dr. Helen Morrison, a forensic psychiatrist who interviewed Gacy extensively, concluded he lacked the capacity for empathy altogether. She noted his flat affect when describing his crimes. No emotion, no reflection, just facts delivered with eerie calmness. Gacy's case also sparked conversations about sexual repression. Though he engaged in same-sex activity, he often denied being gay. Some believe his crimes were a way to destroy the parts of himself he hated, externalizing his internal conflict. Still, even that theory doesn't account for the sheer brutality. His crimes were not impulsive. They were methodical, repeated, and remorseless. A predator in plain sight. One of the enduring lessons from Gacy's case is how predators often blend in. Gacy wasn't a loner. He wasn't the creepy guy in the shadows. He was the guy who threw neighborhood parties, who knew local officials, who smiled in every photo. He used his likability as a weapon. In doing so, he not only fooled his victims, he fooled an entire community. By the end of 1978, the world knew the name John Wayne Gacy and the face behind it. No longer seen as the smiling party clown or upstanding contractor, he was now known as the man who murdered 33 young men and boys, most of whom were buried beneath his suburban home. But even as the investigation came to a close, the shockwaves of his crimes were only beginning to ripple through the country. What followed was one of the most high-profile criminal trials in U.S. history, and a legacy that continues to haunt the true crime world today. The arrest and confession. After Robert Pius's disappearance led investigators to Gacy, a second search warrant uncovered skeletal remains in his crawl space. Within 48 hours, Gacy cracked. He confessed to dozens of murders, chillingly describing how he lured victims, killed them, and buried them. Police were horrified not only by the volume of bodies, but by how casually Gacy recounted each one, at times referring to them by number, not name. Gacy admitted to dumping 5 bodies in the Des Plaines River when he ran out of space under his house. Eventually, the remains of all 33 victims were recovered, though several still remain unidentified to this day. The nation was stunned. News footage showed body bags being carried out of Gacy's modest home, while neighbors looked on in disbelief. The horror had lived right next door, and no one knew. The trial of the century. John Wayne Gacy's trial began in February 1980. Prosecutors painted a picture of a calculating, remorseless predator who had stalked vulnerable boys and young men for years. They presented gruesome forensic evidence, emotional testimonies from victims' families, and Gacy's own words against him. The defense team pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming Gacy suffered from multiple personality disorder and wasn't fully aware of his actions. But the jury didn't buy it. Psychiatrists testified that Gacy knew exactly what he was doing and knew it was wrong. Gacy sat calmly through most of the trial, occasionally sketching or smirking. He showed little emotion as the names of victims were read out or as loved ones testified. After 5 weeks of testimony and only 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict: guilty on all 33 counts of murder. Sentence: death. It was one of the most decisive verdicts in Illinois' history. Life on death row. Gacy spent 14 years on death row at Menard Correctional Center in Illinois. While incarcerated, he became something of a macabre celebrity, giving interviews, maintaining his innocence, and even selling paintings he created behind bars. Many of his paintings were self-portraits of himself as Pogo the Clown. This only deepened public disgust. For the families of the victims, it was salt in a wound that never healed. Still, Gacy continued to manipulate the narrative. In one interview, he declared, "I should never have been convicted of anything more serious than running a cemetery without a license." His lack of remorse never wavered. The execution. On May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection at the Stateville Correctional Center. He was 52 years old. Outside the prison, crowds gathered, some holding candles in memory of the victims, others celebrating the end of Gacy's life. His final meal was fried chicken, shrimp, French fries, strawberries, and a Diet Coke. His final words were reported to be, "Kiss my ass." With his death, one of the darkest chapters in American criminal history came to an end, but the scars remained. Legacy and impact. Gacy's crimes left behind more than victims. They left behind a legacy of mistrust and horror that reshaped how America viewed serial killers. Before Gacy, many imagined killers as outsiders or loners. Gacy shattered that illusion. He was the neighbor, the community leader, the clown at the birthday party. He forced a nation to confront a terrifying truth: evil often hides in plain sight. His case changed how missing persons cases were handled, especially those involving teens and runaways. It pushed law enforcement to take reports more seriously and improved coordination across jurisdictions. Psychologically, Gacy became a case study in evil. His cold charm, double life, and lack of empathy used in criminal justice and forensic psychology programs across the country. The unidentified and the forgotten. Despite years of investigation, several of Gacy's victims remain unidentified, their faces reconstructed with clay or digital scans, their stories lost to time. These unknown boys serve as haunting reminders of how many lives Gacy erased, and how many families never got closure. Organizations continue working to identify them, matching DNA with missing persons databases. For many, the search continues. Conclusion: the man behind the mask. John Wayne Gacy wasn't a monster in the traditional sense. He didn't look the part. He didn't hide in the shadows. He smiled, joked, gave back to his community. And that's what made him so dangerous. Understanding his mind doesn't make his crimes less horrifying, but it does make us more vigilant. His story teaches us that appearances deceive, that evil can wear a mask, and sometimes it wears a clown suit. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, hit the notification bell, and join our growing true crime community.